This Sunday, the 100th episode of Boruto aired, and it's a pretty good occasion to make a video explaining why it's a goddamn shit show. Well, there are a lot of videos out there trashing Boruto, and they're all very good. So I jammed them all together into this toxic clusterfuck that's hopefully a bit better structured. So please find the videos I refer to in the description, and please do watch them. Without wasting any more time, let me just say I've divided this video in 3 parts, each reflecting the issues this show has, the story, characters and setting. The story in this show has 3 big problems. It's horribly paced, it's inconsequential, and it's inconsistent. The biggest indicator of slow pacing in Boruto is the canon to filler ratio. You know you have a problem when there are more filler arcs than canon ones. So how do we determine what a filler is? Well, in Naruto we had a pretty simple rule in place. Whatever was not featured in the manga was filler. In Boruto, the distinction is not so clear. There are some complicating factors, such as, in my opinion, and you may agree or not, we can define a filler in Boruto as being an arc or an episode that's entirely inconsequential to the story, meaning we can completely take it out without affecting the story in the slightest. By that definition, these 2 are the only ones that qualify as canon. These 2 are honorable mentions, and by that I mean, well, most of those episodes are random horseshit. There are a few relevant bits in there. Take for instance the Academy entrance arc, which is a good 15 episodes of well-written, high-quality themes. And that's it. This is the only part of the show that's remotely relevant. If you add 7-8 episodes from Sarda's arc to another 15 from the tuning exam, and thrown in some occasional interesting episodes such as Mitsuki's origin story, you get, at fucking best, around 30% of this show depicting something that actually matters. What about the other 70%? Every cause has an effect. It's probably the producer's least favourite phrase, right up there with logical progression or coherence. Very rarely actions performed by the character lead to any significant development or carry any consequence. For example, think of this little shit. He learns and understands that using ninja devices in the exam is against the rules. Therefore, he knowingly cheats, and several teams and candidates who might have won against him are dropped from the competition. You'd think this is bad, right? Now that doesn't happen only once. He's been cheating since the very beginning of the competition. Therefore, at every single stage. So you can't determine who would have progressed or not. For example, without using his cheats, the water team would have won that round. So there's no telling what the other matchups would have been if Boruto didn't cheat. This actually renders the entire exam invalid. Nothing is salvageable. And let's not forget that this tuning exam was a special one, being the first one after the war that they hosted together. So he dealt massive diplomatic damage, right? I mean, the Leaf's best candidate is a cheater. How does that reflect on your village? And you'd expect after that level of irresponsibility that he wouldn't fucking leave the house. He would be shamed in the streets just like his dad did, right? Or at least held accountable in some way for his actions. But no, not only does he not apologize, but he's also welcomed back like nothing ever happened. Also, remember that little chat Boruto and Shikadai had before their fight? That no matter the winner, they should have a fair match. Shikadai learns that Boruto, one of his closest friends, lied through his teeth to impress his daddy. So you'd expect some sort of animosity from him. And this showed so much potential. Think about it. Best friends turned enemies or rivals, despite their parents actually working together. It would have involved in an organic way all these characters we actually care about, like Naruto and Shikamaru, and explored the relationship between them and their children a bit more. Nope. In like 2 scenes, it all goes back to normal like nothing ever happened. Boruto does nothing to account for what he did. And this isn't a singular instance, the show is replete with examples of this sort. Sumire, the girl from the first arc, is welcomed back after seriously endangering the lives of the villagers. Mitsuki never gets any kind of blame despite practically betraying the village. Boruto and Sarada have their genin status revoked and then awarded again in the same episode. So in conclusion, whatever happens, it just doesn't matter. So we've seen here how there's no effect for a cause, but the reverse also holds true. There are entire plots that have no discernible cause. See Mitsuki's departure, for example. There's just insufficient cause for him to leave the village, particularly after they peddled all that bullshit about how Boruto is his son or whatever. You can't have 70 episodes of Mitsuki adoring Boruto and then have him decide to leave the village, potentially forever, in half an episode. This arc often gets compared with how Sasuke left, so let's explore this a bit. Sasuke was first given power by Orochimaru during the Chunin exams. Then he fought Gaara and realized he wasn't strong enough. Then he meets his brother, which fucks him up really badly. Then he feels like Naruto becomes stronger than him. Then he finally realizes that the village is holding him back and takes another few episodes to decide to leave the village. His decision is a result of a build-up that happens over many episodes. You can't just have him decide in like 10 minutes with a shitty excuse to say, alright, fuck it, I'm done. It's very poor writing. Inconsistency underlies what I've said before and adds another dimension to it. The show drops narrative threads midway and doesn't seem to recover them. For example, do you guys remember Boruto has Jogan? Remember how he was so desperate to prove its existence and learn how to use it? Where did that plot go? You can't just have 80 episodes where the ability is never mentioned. What about the Chunin exam then? Are they gonna retake it? I thought it was really important for Sarada, right? Didn't she want to become Hokage? Before going into main characters, I'd like to have a brief discussion about how the old cast is treated in this show. For me, this is where the show goes from average and bearable to downright infuriating. All those characters we grew up with and loved are simply set aside and given zero development. What's more, within the short time they appear on screen, they almost always perform these repetitive tasks like fucking robots. The best example is Naruto, who's confined to his office doing paperwork. Now I understand they want to shift the attention away from him, but at least come up with a plausible explanation why he doesn't leave a shadow clone there. Or hell, why he even needs to do this. It's not like he's an administrative clerk or anything. And by the way, quick hint for the writers. Since you're arguably killing time anyway in this series, focus a little more on his episodes with his family. Those are quite enjoyable actually, and it wouldn't hurt to see him fucking act like a father and a husband, rather than his awkward, barely sentient robot. Remember her? Well, she's a professional dishwasher now. Episode after episode, arc after arc, I don't think there's ever been a scene with her when she wasn't washing the damn dishes. How many fucking people eat there anyway? But it's fine, she's there for her family, I guess. What is not fine is her interaction with Naruto, which is virtually non-existent. There are no scenes where either of them show any affection or tenderness to the other. There are no scenes where they discuss about their kids. There are no scenes where they discuss the problems in the village. Isn't she supposed to be his other half? Isn't she supposed to be the most trustworthy person in his life, to whom he could always speak his heart? Isn't she supposed to always be there for him? You know, I thought this was a slice of life, but what we see here are these lifeless characters with hollowed out personalities that are squeezed together under the same roof and are labelled as family. Nothing they do feels like family to me. The other two old characters that have bits of screen time here and there are Sasuke and Sakura. Same thing applies, although they're in luck because Kishimoto actually made an effort to give a half-assed explanation as to why Sasuke is always away. Is it a monkey level explanation he pulled out of his ass? Yes. You only have to scratch the surface a little bit and its absurdity comes glaring in your face. What kind of monster doesn't want to see his daughter in 12 years? 12 fucking years, man. I think he's done more emotional damage to her than any assassins could ever inflict. I'm not sure where they wanted to go with this, but as a writer, how can you put your name on a show with such dysfunctional relationships between the characters? The way they brushed off the old characters and confined them to these tropes is just depressing to watch. It's far worse than a bad plot. It feels fucking soulless and empty. People love the characters in Naruto despite them being so many, because of two reasons. One, they were unique at the time in personality and abilities. And two, they were introduced gradually after Team 7 were given a whole season to develop so we can have a solid foundation for what was to come. None of these hold true in Boruto. Most characters are clones of their parents, having similar if not identical personalities and skills, and they were shoved down our throats from the beginning. They take our interest in these characters for granted. Look, if you don't show me something interesting about Boruto, Sarada, Shikadai, whatever, I'm not gonna care about some random clone having anxiety issues. I don't wanna know anything about anyone until you establish a relatively interesting main character. So let's talk a little bit about the main character, right? His shit. It's a fucking disgrace. Here's why. He's annoyingly arrogant and self-confident, which is even more frustrating considering this guy is never ever wrong no matter what the fuck happens. He's never punished for his attitude or actions, there are no real consequences to his deeds and there's no accountability ever demanded of him. He's overpowered for no reason. Look, I understand he's a genius, but that's not enough to explain how he's a Johnny level before even graduating from the academy. Sasuke was a genius as well and he wasn't overpowered. I wouldn't have a problem with him being this strong, as long as they gave a shit and attempted at least a meager explanation as to why he's so ahead of everyone else. By the way, did I mention he can summon giant snake? I think you needed pretty massive amounts of chakra to summon these kinds of animals. Downright rule bending is what this is. He doesn't train, yet results keep coming. Training was an essential part of Naruto. They devoted many episodes just to show how he was overcoming the difficulties and obtaining new abilities. Hard work pays off was one of the lessons we learned from Naruto. In Boruto, he doesn't need to do shit, and he has a fuck ton of abilities in his arsenal. You might say, oh yeah, but in episode 4 they say that he studies hard. Well, fucking show me, man. I'd rather see him learn something new than watch some half-assed plot that leads nowhere anyway. And the most important one, Boruto has no personality, no motivation, doesn't show any desire of moving forward or in any direction whatsoever. Besides his bitching about his dad, I can't really say much about this guy. I mean, he wants to follow in Sasuke's steps, which is welcome, but what does that mean exactly? Does he want to travel alone? Does he want to protect the village from the shadows? And why? What does he want to do? What is his ambition? What's his purpose? Apparently he wants to become a ninja because he wants to stay with his friends. I understand that's a very 12-year-old like answer, but we're still missing a few little details here and there, aren't we? Which is the only thing that makes this show bearable. I think making Sarada and Boruto basically the opposite of their parents is an interesting and welcome decision. Her goal isn't unique by any means, but it creates a refreshing contrast since the main character is usually the one aiming the highest. Unfortunately, outside of that, not much is of notice, unless you count the slightly obnoxious voice and similarly obnoxious lines. She gets bonus points because her arc had a remotely intelligent plot, unlike the rest of the show, which doesn't even try to be coherent at times. Mitsuki doesn't make any sense as a character. He's completely flat. His main feature is his attachment to Boruto. He considers Boruto his son, which I don't understand, and it's not explained in the show at all. And then they really try to make him an interesting character by surrounding him with this mystery that he keeps his powers hidden. The problem is they don't wait for a dramatic moment to disclose it, let alone create any build-up to that moment. Around 40 episodes in, buried deep into the cesspool of fillers, you can find his origin story. The episode in itself isn't bad, it's just misplaced. And it kills any sort of interest I had in this character because they shatter the mystery. Why not have a big fight between Team 7 and some really good villain? And then when all seems lost and everyone seems to have used their tricks and powers, then have Mitsuki save the day with his secret powers. It's a simple idea, but it's effective, and after they win, throw the origin episode as an explanation. That will make a bit more sense, wouldn't it? It's a little over the top, but I don't mind the video games, the laptops, the trains and the power plant. Ninja devices and shit like that? Maybe. I'm not so sure why the big leap towards the technology aesthetic. I think there's a lot of unexplored potential in the medieval setting. What I really have a problem with though, is the chronic lack of tension in this show. And this stems mainly from the absence of any compelling villains. I should have addressed this under characters, but there aren't any villains in this show worth talking about. Yeah, I wasn't entertained by this guy. There was a trend once in Naruto where villains were given ample time to develop, just like the main characters. They've abandoned it. The guy just pops out of the blue, calls everyone inferior beings, and proceeds to exterminate the audience of the Chunin exams. Never mind. I actually like this guy. No, but really, he's just an unoriginal monster, and he's part of the bigger problem. How do you create tension if Naruto is the strongest in the world, he's friends with the second strongest, and allied to all the other villages? Kishimoto and the writers revert to the cheapest trick in the book: give the villain more power. But that's a cheap solution, because you can't perpetually have Naruto be the underdog. It just invalidates all the effort you've put into completing his journey. Was there no point in all his sacrifices? Here's a hint. You don't need your villains to be stronger than Naruto. It doesn't have to be these epic intergalactic battles between giant things all the time. You can more subtly exploit Naruto's weaknesses. Most obvious one, that you've been peddling since the beginning, is his overwhelming responsibility towards the village. If he doesn't have time for his family, then he probably won't have time to respond to 10 concerted attacks across the village, for example. Make the villain outsmart Naruto, not outgun him, because that's unreasonable. Give him a solid motivation so we give a shit about him, and give him some original powers that we haven't seen before. And take your fucking time to develop him. That's the main problem with Shin. He was based on an interesting idea, with interesting motivation and powers. But he didn't have enough development. He had the potential, but they concluded the arc in like 5 episodes. He's just not around enough to build tension or inspire any fear. And one more thing, and this ties in with the inconsequential nature of this show. You need the villain to be able to inflict some damage. Orochimaru defeated Sasuke and cursed him. Itachi killed his entire clan. Pain destroyed the entire village. Get it? Boruto villains show up with loud noises but don't accomplish much, and they get defeated. There's no credibility to them, so there's no tension. I'm struggling to understand Kishimoto's stance on this. He made considerable profits out of this franchise, so I don't think he's in it for the money. He must know that something is wrong with Boruto. You can get an idea pretty quickly just by looking at the comments on every platform that streams Boruto. I've watched Naruto since the beginning, for more than a decade now, but I'm dropping this show and I think all the other fans should. And let's face it, man, they don't give a shit about us. It's all a game for them. How long can they get away with it with putting little to no effort into the story, characters, animation before we leave? How long can they exploit our nostalgia before we realize this show is extremely subpar and honestly just an insult? Now, to return to Kishimoto, my question to him would be: Naruto was your career and made you enough to live comfortably for the rest of your life. It's your legacy. Why would you consciously tarnish it like this?